The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B cast a harsh, unforgiving glow over what would become one of the most shocking paternity hearings in Davidson County's history. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, her hands protectively cradling her 8-month pregnant belly, watching her world crumble with each word spoken by the woman who had destroyed her marriage. Across the aisle, Victoria Sterling adjusted her designer suit and smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the winning cards. Neither woman could have predicted that in the next hour, everything they thought they knew about love, betrayal, and the man they'd both trusted would be turned completely upside down. The morning had started like any other divorce proceeding in Judge Helena Rodriguez's courtroom, but the tension was immediately palpable. Sarah's lawyer, a kind-faced woman named Patricia Wells, had warned her client that today would be difficult. The DNA results that would determine the paternity of Victoria's 18-month-old son were finally ready, and those results would significantly impact the divorce settlement between Sarah and her estranged husband, Marcus Mitchell. Marcus sat between his wife and his alleged mistress, his expensive suit unable to hide the haunted look that had taken residence in his eyes over the past 2 years. Once a successful real estate developer with an easy smile and boundless confidence, he now appeared diminished, caught between two women who represented the devastating choices that had brought them all to this moment. Victoria Sterling commanded attention wherever she went, and the courtroom was no exception. At 32, she possessed the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless despite the early hour, and her emerald green suit probably cost more than Sarah made in 3 months as an elementary school teacher. She held her toddler son, Ethan, on her lap, the boy's dark hair and brown eyes a mirror. Image of Marcus's features, the resemblance between Marcus and little Ethan had been undeniable from the moment. Victoria had first brought the child to Marcus's office 18 months ago, demanding he acknowledge his son and provide financial support. The timing aligned perfectly with the affair that had destroyed Sarah's marriage, and Marcus, overwhelmed by guilt and the striking physical similarities, had never questioned his paternity. Sarah, by contrast, looked exhausted in her simple navy maternity dress, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face pale from months of stress and morning sickness. At 35, she'd spent 12 years building a life with Marcus, dreaming of the children they would raise together in their suburban home. Now, 8 months pregnant with what she'd hoped would be their miracle baby after years of fertility struggles, she was instead facing the dissolution of everything she'd held dear. "Your Honor," Patricia Wells addressed Judge Rodriguez, "we're here today to resolve the paternity question that has been central to these divorce proceedings. My client has endured enormous emotional distress, watching her husband support another woman's child while questioning whether he would even be present for the birth of his own legitimate baby." Victoria's lawyer, a shark-suited man named Douglas Brennan, stood immediately. "Objection to the characterization of legitimate baby. Your Honor, my client's son has every right to his father's support, and we have DNA evidence to prove paternity." Judge Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that had seen every form of human drama, raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Brennan, we're here specifically to review those DNA results. Dr. James Patterson from GeneTech Laboratories is present to explain the findings. Doctor, please approach the bench." Dr. Patterson was a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses who carried himself with the careful precision of someone accustomed to delivering life-altering news. He carried a manila folder that seemed to weigh far more than its contents suggested, and every eye in the courtroom followed his movement as he positioned himself at the witness stand. "Doctor," Judge Rodriguez began, "you've conducted DNA testing on the child in question, Ethan Sterling, using samples from Marcus Mitchell, Victoria Sterling, and for comparison purposes, Sarah Mitchell. Please explain your findings." Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as Dr. Patterson opened his folder and adjusted his glasses. The baby inside her seemed to sense her distress, kicking frantically against her ribs. Victoria, meanwhile, sat back in her chair with a satisfied smile, one hand stroking Ethan's hair while she watched Sarah's obvious distress with something approaching satisfaction. "Your Honor," Dr. Patterson began in his measured, clinical tone, "the DNA analysis has revealed some highly unusual results that required multiple confirmations before we could release our findings." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and Ethan's occasional babbling. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. "The paternity test definitively shows that Marcus Mitchell is not the biological father of Ethan Sterling." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Victoria's confident smile faltered for the first time, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror. "That's impossible," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The lab made a mistake. Look at him." She held Ethan higher, as if his resemblance to Marcus could override scientific evidence. But Dr. Patterson wasn't finished. However, the DNA analysis also revealed something extraordinary. While testing the samples, we discovered that Sarah Mitchell shares significant genetic markers with the child, markers consistent with being his biological aunt. Sarah's world tilted sideways. The fluorescent light seemed to grow brighter, the walls closer. "I don't understand," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Patterson continued gently, "do you have a brother?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Sarah's mind raced backward through years of family history, landing on a painful chapter she'd tried to forget. Yes, David. My younger brother David. But we haven't spoken in 5 years. He's had problems with addiction, and She stopped, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to fit together in her mind. Victoria's face had gone ashen. Her hands shook as she looked down at Ethan, then across the courtroom at Sarah. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "No, this is wrong. Marcus, tell them this is wrong." But Marcus was staring at Victoria with an expression of dawning realization and something approaching rage. "David," he said quietly. "You knew David. He was working construction on the Riverside project 2 years ago. You met him at that company barbecue." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Victoria was on her feet, shouting denials while clutching Ethan to her chest. Sarah felt the world spinning around her, the stress and shock overwhelming her pregnant body. The last thing she remembered was Patricia Wells calling her name as darkness closed in around her. When Sarah regained consciousness, she was lying on a bench in the courthouse hallway, a paramedic taking her blood pressure while Patricia held her hand. Through the open courtroom doors, she could hear Victoria's voice, now shrill and desperate, demanding retests and threatening lawsuits. "The baby?" Sarah asked weakly. "Fine," the paramedic assured her. "Your blood pressure spiked, but both you and the baby are stable. Just try to stay calm." Patricia squeezed her hand. "Sarah, I need to tell you what happened after you fainted." Victoria finally broke down and admitted the truth. She did have an affair with your brother David during the time she was also seeing Marcus. She chose to claim Marcus was the father because he had more money and stability. Sarah closed her eyes, processing the magnitude of the deception. Her brother David, the troubled younger sibling she'd tried so hard to help over the years, had unknowingly become the father of the child who had destroyed her marriage. Victoria had manipulated both brothers, choosing the one she thought would provide a better life for her son. "Where is she now?" Sarah asked. "Gone. She left with Ethan about 10 minutes ago." Judge Rodriguez dismissed the paternity case, obviously, and Marcus's lawyer is already filing motions to have the divorce settlement adjusted since there's no longer any question of child support. Sarah struggled to sit up, her mind clearing as the immediate crisis passed. "And Marcus?" Patricia hesitated. "He's still in there, talking to his lawyer. Sarah, I have to ask, what do you want to do? The grounds for your divorce haven't changed. He still had the affair, still betrayed your trust. The fact that Victoria lied about the baby doesn't erase what he did." Sarah looked through the courtroom doors at her estranged husband. Marcus was sitting alone now, his head in his hands, the weight of 2 years of guilt and deception finally lifting from his shoulders. She thought about the years they'd spent together, the good times before Victoria Sterling had entered their lives, the baby growing inside her who deserved to know both parents. But she also thought about the trust that had been shattered, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering if her husband was with another woman and that woman's child. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal, regardless of the circumstances that followed. Judge Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, her expression softer than it had been in the courtroom. "Mrs. Mitchell, how are you feeling?" "Better, Your Honor. Thank you." "This has been an extraordinary day," the judge said, settling into a nearby chair. "In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like it. I wanted to ask if you needed any additional time to consider your options regarding the divorce proceedings." Sarah looked again at Marcus, who had now noticed her in the hallway and was walking toward them with hesitant steps. His face was a mixture of relief, shame, and something that might have been hope. "Sarah," he said quietly when he reached her. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need you to know. I never would have supported that child if I'd known he wasn't mine. Not because I wouldn't care about him, but because it would have meant Victoria was lying about everything." "She was lying about everything anyway," Sarah replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Marcus nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I destroyed our marriage for someone who was using both of us. I'll never forgive myself for that. But Sarah, this baby you're carrying, our baby, it's the only good thing to come out of this nightmare. I want to be part of his or her life, even if you can't forgive me." Sarah felt the baby kick, as if responding to his father's voice. She looked at the man she'd loved for more than a decade, the man who had betrayed her trust, but who was also the father of the child she carried. The path forward wasn't clear, and forgiveness wouldn't come easily or quickly. But perhaps, with time and counseling and a commitment to rebuilding what had been broken, there might be a chance for healing. "I need time," she said finally. "And I need you to prove that you've changed, not just say it. If you want to be part of this baby's life, you'll have to earn that right." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Whatever it takes. However long it takes." 3 months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Emma. Marcus was present for the delivery, having spent the preceding months in therapy and working to rebuild Sarah's trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. Victoria Sterling had left town entirely, taking Ethan with her and leaving no forwarding address. Sarah's brother David, when finally located and informed about his son, was completing his 3rd attempt at rehabilitation. The news that he had a child served as additional motivation for his recovery, though the complex legal and emotional situation surrounding Ethan's paternity would take years to fully resolve. The divorce proceedings were ultimately suspended while Sarah and Marcus attempted reconciliation. Through intensive couples counseling, it wasn't a fairy tale ending. Trust, once broken, required constant work to rebuild. But sometimes, Sarah reflected as she watched Marcus gently feeding baby Emma while they discussed their plans for the future, the most unexpected revelations can clear away the lies and deception that have poisoned a relationship, leaving behind the possibility of starting fresh. Victoria Sterling's deception had indeed destroyed Sarah's marriage, but in the end, it was the truth, however shocking and painful, that offered them the chance to build something new and hopefully stronger. The woman who had entered their lives with such confident malice had left behind only the wreckage of her own lies, while the family she'd tried to tear apart slowly began the careful work of healing.